Do you need flood insurance when you're buying a home in Cabarrus County, North Carolina? Now, of course, that includes Concord, Harrisburg, Kannapolis, Mount Pleasant, Midland, and the unincorporated areas of the county. And you might also be wondering about the entire Charlotte area because North Carolina has been in the news a lot for bad weather after the devastating effects of Hurricane Helene that happened in 2024. It's natural to ask those questions, but where I want you to start is from the place of preparation. No matter where you're buying a house, if it can rain there, it can flood there. The Western North Carolina story is one that has resonated with people all over the place because the areas in the mountains that flooded were not in a floodplain. They were not historically prone to floods, and still that hurricane landed on top of them and washed houses away. The people who did not have flood insurance, which was the bulk of the impacted people, sure wish they'd had some kind of protection. So I will just say it again. If it can rain where you are, it can flood. So let's talk about how you plan for that no matter where you're purchasing. And yes, it does matter if your property is in a floodplain. I'm going to share with you a map of Harrisburg, North Carolina. Now, this is just a portion of Harrisburg, but I want you to be able to gather how a flood map works. You should also know you can pull up in any location at any time your information at floodsmart.gov. You can get a quote for insurance, you can check the current maps, and you can get a good feel for what you're dealing with. Spoiler alert, if you are a realtor watching my videos, hey friend, you should pull this on every listing that you have. Now, I will go ahead and tell you that if your property is not in a flood zone, your insurance will be a lot less expensive because you are not deemed to be a great risk for flood. That's a win for you as a consumer. Now, when you look at this particular map, you will see some of the flood zone area that winds in and around where it tends to be rivers, creeks, other low-lying areas where you have water all the time. Now, can you build a house in the floodplain? In some municipalities, yes, if you are following certain rules around design, which typically involved a lifted crawl space. In fact, when you're looking at houses on the market, if you see one that's got a great number of steps to the front door, it might be in a floodplain, and that person knew that they were taking a risk by building a house there, so they built it differently. The good example here to use are houses in the coastal region, which you often see up on stilts, and you expect that because in the coastal areas, they get far more hurricane situations and flooding situations than we do here in the Piedmont of North Carolina. So when you call your insurance agent and say, hey, I need a quote for homeowners insurance for this property in Harrisburg, these are the maps they're going to use. They're going to take a look at your homeowners insurance. And then if you choose to add flood insurance, that's a separate fee and a separate policy. What that means is that if your property floods and you have abided by all of the small print that goes along with any insurance policy, you can get up to $250,000 in protection on your property. One of the things you have to understand about flood insurance, friends, is that there are a lot of myths out there roaming around on the internet. And Abraham Lincoln actually had nothing to say about flood insurance. You will find people that say nobody should buy a home in a flood zone and those houses deserve to wash away. You will have people who say that it's only multimillionaires who own coastal houses that need flood insurance. Just ignore any of that garbage and go straight to the source, which is floodsmart.gov. Ask your local realtor and then ask your insurance agent about that property. You should know that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, moves floodplains around. Now, why would they do that? Well, because development is continually happening in growing areas like North Carolina. And anytime you add a development, you are adding foundations and driveways and sidewalks and patios, and those are what we call impermeable areas. So that's the big concreted areas where water can no longer go into the ground, so it comes off. That's what moves the flood zones around in a lot of scenarios. You could also say that erosion can be a part of what changes the flood zones, and that also can be attributed in large part to development or to loss of agricultural areas. So all of that being said, you want to talk to your insurance agent about floodplain and know exactly what the insurance is going to cost. Now, if we see a house that's in a zone on the map and it's in the floodplain, what you should know is that if you are getting a mortgage on that property, the bank is very likely going to tell you that you have to carry flood insurance to get the mortgage. Now, I'll fully disclose, I live in a house that's got floodplain in the property. I live on 10 acres and there's a river down at the back of our property. The floodplain does not touch my house. In fact, my house sits on the hill and we go downhill towards the stream where there is floodplain. But the mortgage lender required us to carry flood insurance because there's flood insurance on our dirt. Now, I'll just tell you, if that thing floods my house, I'm pretty sure the ark itself is going to come down the street, because that would be an absolutely extreme scenario. But extreme scenarios happen. Therefore, even if my bank did not require it, I would be carrying flood insurance, because if I look at what's happened around natural disasters, Hurricane Harvey, which hit Houston in, I believe, 2018, 80% of those properties did not have flood insurance and wish they had. When I look at the properties impacted in Western North Carolina, there were so many people who flooded and had no idea that it could ever happen, and they probably wish they'd had the chance to go back and change that. So long story short, in Cabarrus County, North Carolina, and anywhere in the greater Charlotte region, it rains and it can flood. My best advice to you is to talk to your realtor about the pros and cons of a floodplain house. We can tell you what it does or does not do to the property value. And always make sure that as you consider your insurance planning, you go ahead and get a number on flood insurance and evaluate the pros and cons so you can make the best decision for yourself. Now, for more tips on buying a house in this area, make sure you download my free relocation guide, and always give us a call, because when we're bringing new neighbors in, the best educated ones are the neighbors we love welcoming to this area. So thanks. Hit the bell to subscribe, and I'll see you.